What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy, and so I wound up watching the presidential debate. I didn't get to watch it the day of because I was working that day, but the next day I looked it up on YouTube and watched it. I was paying attention the vast majority of the time, maybe not to every single second though, so I might be slightly off on just one little thing or two in terms of what was said or what happened and different things like that. But anyway, some overall thoughts. Because really I'm going to focus on what stood out to me on the whole. There will be some specific moments mentioned as examples of things, but anyway. First off, one thing that seemed a bit odd, but I think it was just because of how things played out. It seemed like Joe Biden kind of wound up getting a little bit more like clear, like train of thought speaking time. But I think that's just because as he was talking, Trump kept kind of interrupting, which in order to try and keep the amount of time even between the two wound up giving Biden a little more time at the end of seemingly most of the segments, really. And, you know, it's one of those things where, again, I think it's just because of how it played out. But anyway, some other things that stood out to me are a little bit kind of the engagement and who seemed to be the focus of each participant within the debate. Joe Biden seemed far more focused on the moderator, Chris Wallace, and even at times the camera, signaling, you know, he's trying to speak to or focus on us, the viewers, the citizens of the United States. And then Trump, meanwhile, seemed very focused on Biden himself, and at times Chris Wallace as well. But I don't seem to recall a particular moment of Trump looking directly into the camera, which, granted, some people just kind of do. I know I tend to kind of shift my gaze around a bit, just at a sheer force of habit. It's not like I'm intentionally trying to, you know, not look someone in the eyes. But I do make eye contact sometimes, generally speaking. But anyway, so with some of that, even just kind of continuing that line of thought, but branching it out a little bit to the way that they were speaking, Trump seemed to be saying things, you know, much more focused, or like he seemed to focus more so on responses to what Biden said than even necessarily answering directly the questions that were asked of him. He did, like, he would give brief answers to the actual question at hand most of the time, but then kind of extend that out to either something only tangentially related or a response to something that Biden had said or done or whatever. Biden, on the other hand, seemed more focused on, I mean, yes, there was time responding, but his responses were, like, his reactionary responses seemed rather brief comparatively, and, you know, he would either say something like, you know, that's wrong and, you know, move on to a point that he was trying to make related to the question or whatever was being discussed at that moment. Or, he would focus kind of more so on himself and his ideas coming in. But maybe that's just me. Another thing seemed to be how, honestly, both of them in a way kind of deflected some things a bit. They both kind of showed hints of trying not to take responsibility for the negative associations made with them, but also kind of garner praise for the positive associations made with them. However, it seemed far more apparent on Trump's end of things, especially on the praise end. He whenever he focused on what has happened during his presidency and how good the economy was and things like that, he focused far more on himself and tried to take credit for all of these things, and couldn't even seem to admit, regarding the economy, that he had been placed in a relatively good situation coming into his presidency. Whereas when he spoke of Joe Biden and what happened during his years, in Congress or as vice president, he seemed a lot more accusatory of Biden and basically saying, I did all this stuff while you couldn't in your 47 years of being, being a politician. That might not have been his exact word, but in any case, if we're comparing the two, realistically speaking, Trump should be held more responsible for what has happened during his presidency than Biden should during his years in Congress or even as vice president, because the vice president does not have as much power as the primary president. So, I mean, yes, there might have been certain departments and areas that Biden was sort of in charge of, but again, he doesn't necessarily have the same kind of power to, make executive orders regarding whatever it might happen to be as vice president that Donald Trump did, or has had, I should say, as president. So it's a slightly unfair comparison there. But even with that, Biden seemed to, his way of deflecting, in a sense, was to try and essentially say, okay, whatever I've done before, here's what I'm thinking about doing now. Whereas Trump seems to be, or the way Trump was communicating seemed more of either, he was praising himself for things that went well during his presidency, or he was essentially trying to blame other people for the bad things that have happened during his presidency. And there wasn't even really that much of a focus in those deflecting moments on, here's my plan going forward. He did state plans and ideas on things, but not necessarily in those moments as much as Biden seemed to. And I think really when it comes down to, I mean, look, I'm not going to say any particular person won the debate or anything like that. But on the whole, I think in terms of, actually focusing on the questions or the topics at hand, the only part Biden really seemed to kind of slip away from that, in the beginning, he kind of started focusing on, either basically when they were supposed to be talking about the Supreme Court and having a new justice in place, Biden kind of deviated from the topic there. Otherwise, his deviations seemed to more so be in response to things that Trump was saying or asking that deviated from the topic in the first place. Trump, I mean, he deviated some. I mean, like, a lot of stuff that he said was, again, at least in some slight way related, but, he tended to kind of deviate more, at least as far as I could tell, from whatever the main question at hand was or the particular topic that they were addressing, with the slight exception, seemingly, of talking about the Supreme Court and, having a new justice in place, or basically placing a new justice in the court, was where he actually seemed to be most focused. And on kind of a different matter with regards to the way that they handled or introduced things like basically personal attacks. I mean, both did some for sure. There was a lot of he doesn't know what he's talking about on both sides. I think Trump, on the whole, went a little more actual, like, personal with his attacks, talking about, family members and what did or did not happen to or with them. Whereas Biden's kind of personal attacks were a lot more along the lines of just he doesn't know what he's talking about, and then moving along. It was, I mean, the primary ways that it seemed like Joe Biden attacked Trump personally, again, were either those kind of dismissive words, with, maybe some introduction of here's what has happened regarding this during his presidency, which is why I say he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I think there was maybe once when Trump, brought up something that happened with Biden's family, where Biden kind of countered with, the fact that Donald Trump has brought in many of his own family members into, important seats, either in his cabinet or in basically some important position connected in some way with his presidency. And that was really all the more personal it seemed like Biden got. Trump, meanwhile, was talking directly about, well, isn't it true that, your son, I think it was Hunter in that case, that, your son got hundreds of millions of dollars from Russia for XYZ, or saying that Hunter was dishonorably discharged, which Biden then kind of countered with, no, it wasn't a dishonorable discharge. He failed a drug test and got discharged, but it wasn't dishonorably. And just different things like that, which is kind of funny how, like, early on, Trump basically said something to the effect of he didn't really know Hunter, but he knew Beau Biden. But then he goes on to make these comments about Hunter Biden. And so, like, does he know about Hunter or not? And that was kind of confusing to me. And again, it seemed more like, it just seemed more in the vein of Donald Trump wanting to make these kind of personal attacks even if there wasn't necessarily a ton of backing behind those attacks or whatever, like that particular aspect of things made Trump seem a little more desperate. And I can't say that really reflected well on his debate performance. Otherwise, I mean, I don't really want to say too much regarding particular policies and stuff like that. Because from that particular standpoint, I mean, each had some ideas where it's like, yeah, okay, maybe part of this is good, another part of this is not so good, or even just, I mean, realistically, there wasn't all that much time spent on policy and what their plans were for their presidency outside of maybe like kind of the designated 2 minutes at the beginning of each section for each person. And even at that, sometimes it deviated from policy, really, because a lot of those introductory questions in each segment were, why should we trust you over your opponent to handle this matter? So, yeah. Anyway. So those were kind of the main things that stuck out to me from the first presidential debate, at least. I don't know how they're going to do other ones in the future. The next debate is actually supposed to be a vice presidential debate. So I would imagine it's going to be a whole different ballgame with how that plays out. But who knows? And then the next actual presidential debate after that, I'm not even sure how that's going to happen anymore. Because the president and the first lady apparently have been... It has been reported that they have COVID. So, I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out. But anyway. Yeah. There are more things that I could say, but those are kind of the primary things that stuck out to me, I think, from the first presidential debate. As always, whatever your thoughts are, leave them down below. And otherwise, you know what else to do to interact with this video, like, share, subscribe, click the bell. And if you don't know any of that stuff, just look down in the description for more info on all that, on my social media pages and how to follow those. Yeah, it's all down there. So anyway, I guess that's going to do it for now. So, hope y'all enjoyed the video. I'm hoping this will maybe just kind of spark some discussion, whether in the comments section down there or, person to person, whatever. Anyway, I guess that's all I've got to say. So I hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.